Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh and salam sejahtera to all again. So I will continue with part 2 from the lecture 4 slide, Behaviorism Learning Theory. In terms of behaviorist learning pedagogy, the most popular pedagogical approaches usually implemented are reward and punishment, behavioral instructional design, and taxonomies of learning. These are the implications of behaviorism learning theory with the aim to promote and modify observable behavior in people. Learning is considered a behavior that demonstrates acquisition of knowledge or skills. The first pedagogy is the reward and punishment, or reinforcement and punishment. We can add a stimulus to discourage a behavior, or we can add a stimulus to encourage a behavior, or we can also remove a stimulus to discourage a behavior, or another one, we can also remove a stimulus to encourage a behavior. An example of a positive reinforcement is student is given praise for good behavior, whereas another example of a positive punishment, student is given extra homework for misbehaving. An example of a negative punishment, student is exempt from field trip for misbehaving. And an example of a negative reinforcement, student is exempt from quiz for good behavior. These are other examples of the positive and negative reinforcement and punishment. The second pedagogy is behavioral instructional design that refers to behavioral approaches to teaching that focus on the prescriptions for what stimuli to employ if a particular response is intended. Among the behavioral approaches to teaching are the skills and information to be learned are broken down into small units. Breaking down a task into smaller steps or chunks, and learning success was assessed by tests. Therefore, the Bloom taxonomy is important in order to design and test instruction. Other behavioral approaches to teaching are instruction is direct, or what we call as teacher-centered. Teachers must direct the learning process. Learning is passive. Learning requires an external reward like praises. Knowledge is a matter of remembering information. And students' work is checked regularly and feedback is provided as well as encouragement as a reinforcement. The third pedagogy or implication of behaviorism learning theory is the emergence of taxonomy of educational objectives, that is the Bloom taxonomy. The taxonomy could help teachers specify curricular objectives and ensure that the educational plans cover the range of behaviors required to be taught. This is the Bloom's taxonomy for the cognitive domain that consists of 6 categories set out as learning objectives for students that were listed according to level of difficulty in that the first must be mastered before the next. So normally, you can find the course objectives outlined in the course syllabus. And normally, educators prepare their course content objectives based on behavioral objective using the keywords from the Bloom taxonomy according to the level of difficulty. Moving on to the behaviorism learning theory contribution, the three most popular contributions from this theory is the formulation of the course content objectives. The second contribution is the emergence of Bloom's taxonomy, where on the right side of the table are the keywords used to formulate the course content objectives. An example, at the end of the course, students will be able to understand, to apply, to choose, or to identify. And the third contribution is the programmed or structured teaching, where the content is divided and structured into small modules or units. The information should be presented in small amounts so that responses can be reinforced. Example of the program or structured teaching. Next is about how technologies has been utilized based on behaviorist learning theory. Instructional technology has its roots in behaviorism. Learning technologies that were intended to encourage practice and reinforcement of specific tasks were developed at that era. Two major examples of technologies based on behaviorist learning theory emerge, which are teaching machines and program instruction and computer-assisted instruction, CAI, or computer-assisted learning, CAL. This is an example of teaching machines and program instruction, first proposed by B.F. Skinner, related to the operant conditioning, the rat experiment. This is an example of the CAI or CAL, where the computer program plays the role of a teacher in posting the problems to be solved. The content is textually or graphically displayed, where lectures, tutorials, drills, demonstrations, and other forms of control teaching guide the design of the software. Another example of the CAI or CAL, where the program controls the presentation sequence and display rate that involve attention-focusing devices such as animation, sound, pointers, and so forth are used. Other examples of technologies based on behaviorist learning theory. Computer-assisted instruction, CAI, or computer-assisted learning, CAL, is a drill and practice or electronic page-turning approach to learning, which were the earliest forms of educational software. Where can we normally see the application of behaviorism learning theory? Thus, behaviorism learning theory is still relevant now in the 21st century? Actually, behaviorism's influence is still strong in corporate and military training and in some areas of science, engineering, and medical training. Behaviorism is still relevant and it can be of particular value for rote learning of facts or standard procedures. Behaviorism, with its emphasis on rewards and punishment as drivers of learning, and on predefined and measurable outcomes, which are the learning objectives, is actually the basis of popular conceptions of learning among many parents and politicians. Behaviorism learning theory also is still being practiced in prisons and some psychiatric institutions. And of course, it is present whenever a teacher or a parent praises or otherwise rewards a child for an achievement. So, as a summary for the behaviorism learning theory, the gist is that behaviorists believe that mind and mental behaviors are predictable. They treat mind as a black box. They believe that knowledge in the person needs to be filled, needs to be disciplined, and needs to be trained. They treat all students are the same, and they believe that learning happens when there are changes of behavior that are not due to growth or matured by age. So, this is the behavioral teaching formula. First, the teacher or educator or the software must provide the stimulus to receive the response from the learner. Next, condition the learners with the reinforcement or punishment and repeat these steps until the target or final response are achieved. As a summary, stimulus and reinforcement help establish behaviors, while conditioning strengthens the stimulus response links. Behaviorism approach to teaching is a teacher-centered approach where the students need to memorize large amounts of information. I think that's all for today. Have a great day ahead.